Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses.
No, it's the second.
Oh man.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. The guys are laughing because in true fashion, for some reason, I seem to really struggle with getting my tech set up for these. But nonetheless, here we are, and we are ready to rock and roll. So kick things off this week. I'm just going to put it out there. It's my birthday today, so turning 40. Have moved into the new decade, so that's exciting. And that's pretty much what's going on this week. I just turning older. that's what I'm up to.
Amen.
So yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
What about you guys? What do you got going on this week? Shan, what's going on for you, man?
I've been working on the house, getting it ready to rent. I got a tenant moving in September, so I've kind of been full force trying to get everything prepped, like painted, redoing the yard, redoing some of the fixtures, and then I'm also at the same time trying to get prepared to move next month. So it's a little bit of a flustered week or flustered month for me, but other than that, not too much.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, for
Right.
me, I'm just still doing same old, same old. Hasn't really changed actually much for me over the last few weeks. I've just been studying programming and playing a lot of hockey, so it's been fun.
All right. No, it's good to keep progressing in those areas. As we learned last week, you're a big fan of mastery, so that makes sense. Well, I know this week we actually had a guest provide us or a listener provide us with a question. So do one of you guys have that we can kind of dive into it?
Yeah, I got it up here. Essentially, the question boiled down to how to make lower level employees feel a connection or tie to upper management. So we don't exactly like know the exact nature of like to what degree like what lower level means versus what upper management means. But I think regardless, it is applicable enough to where we can talk about it. But it's in the specific confines of remote workers, because they mentioned that it was a little bit easier when people were in the office to build that connection between those workers and upper management. Which makes a lot of sense. You can physically see people generate that connection. It's a little bit easier than if you don't ever really get to see them in person. And they're kind of wondering what would be some ways to generate that tie between upper management and these remote workers that they are currently struggling with building connections with. And I definitely, when I heard the question, honestly, I was kind of at a loss because I think it's actually a really difficult problem to solve. And I feel like it's actually fairly a new problem space that's sprouting up more and more for businesses as COVID hit. Tons of people went remote. A lot of businesses had to adapt to having their workers remote, and I think there's a lot of managers without the experience with handling remote employees, and it's a new realm that they're not kind of used to working with. And because I know the things that make me feel a tie to my bosses has always and their bosses has always been them stopping in and just saying hi physically. Like I think perfect example when we were still working together, Josh, when you kind of moved up to your new role and there was a new manager directly above me. So there was kind of like a layer in between us and you were no longer physically working in the same area as us. One thing that I thought you did really well was you would still like swing by and we'd see you relatively regularly and we get to chat, talk about work, talk about not work, right? And, actually still stay in touch at a more personable level. And I'm at a loss for how you would do that remotely. Because I think the biggest thing with remote is that, you would almost have to be in like a Discord call or like a chat call where it's like anyone can just pop in at any time and you can just, talk about stuff together. But I was kind of curious, like, especially from your perspective, Josh, being in a management position, how you've thought about that.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's really any different than me being intentional about stopping in, right? I think it comes down to intentionality for those leaders. It's going to be super important if you want to build a connection with anyone, right? You have to invest in that connection. It's the same as, friends from, maybe high school, college, that type of thing. If you want to stay connected with them, you have to put in the effort to make that happen, whether it's picking up the phone but it requires a commitment on your end, and it requires time. One of the things that I've always tried to be aware of. Yes, it's easy. It's probably easier for me to do a walk by when you're talking 20 people. It's a little more difficult if I want to try to schedule 5, 10, 15 minutes to just pop in and call somebody, and see how they're doing. But Teams does have, the status availability, which kind of indicates if someone might be free and might have some time for you to check in real quick, which is essentially the same thing you do in a walk by, right? I walk by. If you're on the phone, I'm not stopping to interrupt you, and I kind of read the situation. So I think there's definitely still some intentionality that has to go into building and fostering those relationships with remote, maybe even more so than would be required in person. In person is a little bit easier because, to your point, we could just maybe cross each other and go into the restroom, right? Which isn't going to happen organically if we're in two different locations. So there's a little more intentionality that's required to make it happen. But I think it also goes back to your priorities as a leader. Where can you make the biggest impact? And I think making sure that your team feels included and connected is going to only enhance their output and the synergy that you can achieve, and ultimately give you the best results. Now, that can be easier said than done. So one of the new features that I have been testing out is I found, and I know Google has this, but I'm using Outlook, but there's actually a meeting buffer that you can put in. So when I schedule an hour meeting, it actually schedules it for 55 minutes. And what's nice about that is it gives me a little bit of that travel time back or whatever it might be. So maybe I can squeeze in a quick 5-minute touch base with somebody, especially if it was related to the meeting I just had. I want to give them a heads up. I want to, just check and see how they're doing. And that takes the pressure off them too, because they know it's not going to be an hour-long call from their boss. It's going to be, hey, he's just popping in for a quick chat, see how things are going. Um, you know, but again, it comes down to intentionality for me, I think.
Yeah,
Shannon.
I was
Oh,
curious on Shan's perspective too, since he is actually working remotely right now.
Yeah. The environments are very opposite for me. I mean, just to give a little background, the last I was in person, I actually worked for Josh, and that atmosphere, well, it's not necessarily atmosphere is a lot different, but the way that you kind of work with upper management is a lot different when you're fully remote, right? You can't just like pop in somewhere, or you can't catch someone in the hallway, or just stop by or anything like that. It's a lot more formal. So it has been like a learning curve to adapt to that, because as someone who was working with Josh for some time and used to that environment where I'd see him at least every day, um, I had to switch up to where I kind of have to create the environment and create the situation to where like you can have that kind of relationship with upper management, because it wouldn't naturally come for me in my new position, right? Like I have a director, we check in every day, we have one-on-one scheduled once a month, but beyond that, usually unless you're collaborating on a project, you don't get too much FaceTime. So like one of the initial things I did, because of I feel like that perspective matches, because I literally did this because of the environment I came from, where again I was seeing Josh and upper management every day to not seeing him. What I immediately did, is when I requested that my one-on-ones would be every 2 weeks instead of or once a month. Not necessarily because I felt like I needed to check in that often, but more to just allow myself to have that FaceTime. And I'm at the point where I don't really need to touch base twice a month or every other week. So instead, I'm actually working with my boss to see if we can do like code reviews, or he's a really experienced software engineer. So I actually see if he demo some of the projects he's working on. So we'll use that as like a collaborative effort. And coming from his background and his personality type, I can tell that's probably not too common that he gets those kind of requests. So I feel like that's kind of that gray scope, or at least that like gray area when someone's trying to figure out how they can be more involved with upper management. Like the opportunities, unfortunately, sometimes don't just happen. You have to kind of create them. So I've been working on that. And another thing that I found extremely useful, because I really suffered this for the first few months. I felt like there's no way I could develop a relationship with upper management. But what I did instead is we created these power groups. So, for instance, on the application projects we're working on, we might have a manager assigned, or my director might be involved. So we'll create these teams power groups where we'll check in, we'll see if we want to meet like once a week, or if anyone's got like extra time, we can kind of ask each other questions, stuff like that. Those kind of group chats didn't exist beforehand, and they probably would have never existed because it's just kind of working out of a CRM at that point. So for me, it's taking that like extra initiative, because I will be blunt, when you're fully remote, it's not the same. Like there's no saying it's relative or just as capable as in person. It's not. Like at the end of the day, you have to kind of acknowledge that a remote environment is not the same as in person. And the same probably goes for when Josh mentioned, like if you have a team of 60 versus like a team of 20, same thing, right? Like it's just not realistically the same. So you kind of have to take that in perspective, and make the initiative knowing that.
So one thing I'll add to that too, because you're right. The larger the team, the more challenging it can be. And remote is different, so you have to handle it differently. But there are some, I guess, familiarity items that you can probably bring in. And I apologize for not knowing if Slack has this, but I know Teams has kind of a virtual space where you can actually go into with your avatars and hang out. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I was in a meeting the other day and we did that. And, it definitely feels more like a team outing type of thing than a meeting, because there was like cornhole. We were playing virtual cornhole and roasting marshmallows and weird stuff, when you think about it from a virtual environment. But if you've used any of the VR MetaQuest type thing, that's what it felt like a lot, like if I was in an Oculus. And that's built into Teams now. I know early on in COVID, one of the things we did is we actually scheduled a happy hour. It's not exactly the same, you're absolutely right, but everyone hanging around, kind of talking about whatever. It's a little bit, again, you have to be a little more intentional about how you structure it, because 60 people in a room might be really difficult. But could you do little breakout rooms of 5 and mix that up and do little activities and things like that to kind of cahoots about people? There's different ways. You just have to think about it from a different lens. How would you want to feel connected? And Colby, I just want to make sure we're hitting the question, because I want to make sure I understood it right as you read it. Is this from the perspective of like someone in a leadership role, or is this from the perspective of like someone on the employee side trying to feel more connected?
It's
Because
from
I
the
feel like what
leadership
I'm
role.
talking about is more leadership side of things. So I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it's definitely from the leadership side, and it's basically, and we touched on it a little bit, but part of the issue is that there's a chunk of their workers that are remote, and there's a chunk that aren't, and so they don't really have an issue with the ones that are in person, it seems, but it seems like they're having a hard time getting the people that are remote to feel a part of the team. And that's really tough because I remember, working from my last job, there were times where like people would be remote, and especially with our group, we were like all clustered together closely physically, and so we'd always like just literally be talking to each other as we're working, and that person just doesn't get access. They don't get access to all the jokes we're talking about, the personal stuff we're relaying. Like they're kind of like isolated in their own individual bubble. That's why, like, personally, I was thinking that, like, maybe it sounds kind of silly, but when I go home and like I'm playing games, right? Even if there's no one, like, if no one's familiar with Discord, it's essentially like a chat room server thing where you can be in a sort of room and people can join in. You can all talk together like on the same call, right? And what's cool about it from like a gamer's perspective is that like you have a server, people are already in it. You can join in these individual lobbies of chat channels, and like I could just be sitting in there by myself, right? And then when someone's available, they can jump in, they'll see that I'm there, and like we can just, play games and, shoot the shit with one another. And it's just, not a big deal. You don't have to talk to one another. Sometimes like you're both playing two different games, and sometimes you'll just like suddenly ask like, hey, like what have you been up to recently? Like, right, there's no pressure to talk or anything, but at least like you kind of still have someone there. And I thought like that could be maybe an interesting idea, especially for like all the remote people to be able to do it. I think the problem though is still is that like not everyone wants to do that.
Right.
And I think specifically with remote workers, not all of them, because it's very context dependent on why they may be working remote. Some people work remote because they don't want that in office feeling. I mean, straight up, there are people that don't like to be social with a bunch of other people. And that's why they like being remote, because they feel like they can just sit down, do their job really well, contribute, and that's the end of it. And I think to some extent you need to respect that, especially if they're a really strong worker that does a great job for you. I think just acknowledging like, hey, every so often, like you're doing a great job. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Is there anything we can do for you to help out? Like I think stuff like that goes a long way with those types of people. They're your introverts. They don't want the cahoots games together. They're the people that are probably going to be like, oh, I actually have to go do something with my kid, at such and such time, or I'm busy at that time, right? They'll make up whatever excuse. And I'm like I said, I'm not saying that's everyone that's remote, but there's a large portion of people that work remote that really like the fact that they don't need to do those social interactions because it makes them uncomfortable for whatever reason. And in that case, I think actually the best option, if you don't want to lose them as an employee, is just to make sure that they feel appreciated for the work that they're doing. And if they're producing quality work for you, I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but they don't want to feel like they're a part of the team in the way that you want them to feel a part of the team. Sometimes you just need to let people experience their contribution in their own individual way and then leave it at that, right? Like if it's not causing any internal strife or any problems, then I don't really see a problem with it.
Yeah, just
Well, I
like
think-
opening up the opportunity for like someone to step into that kind of environment and meet with middle management, or at least like have the chance to do so without kind of forcing it upon anyone. And I think those are the more striving, like leadership led kind of environments. But what were you going to say, Josh?
Well, I was just going to say, I think Colby brought up a really interesting point about personalizing the way you interact with them. I actually tried what you were talking about, Colby, kind of like a pseudo Discord, where we created a meeting that was open all day, and you could sit in it if you wanted to, and communicate. But to your point, a lot of people didn't join. I think they tried it, day one or whatever, but it was a little bit different to sit in there. And when you're hopping in and out into other meetings, it was just kind of a little bit awkward, I guess, probably, for lack of a better term. It wasn't super simple and easy. And it was at the beginning of COVID when we were all trying to figure out, okay, how do we build this connection? But I do agree with you wholeheartedly that there are some people that probably won't necessarily want to participate in every activity. So I think it's important from a leadership perspective to figure out how do they drive their connection to the company, right? Because if they are an introvert and they don't want to do that, there's still maybe something that they are passionate about that they want to connect with. The other thing that I'm super curious about, and I kind of want to get Shan's perspective since he is in a full-time remote capacity now. Like, what are your thoughts of, because I can tell you when I went full-time remote back when COVID was going on full force, I found myself wanting to have more of a hybrid role. I didn't want to necessarily be 100% remote. I don't know if I necessarily wanted to be 100% in office, but I wanted to come in and feel the connection, kind of like we're talking about. So I'm curious, and I don't know if it says anything in the question, Colby, but do those people ever come into the office, or are they like literally 100% remote? So that's why I'm curious from your point, Shan, like, do you ever go into the office? Would that upset you being a remote worker? Like, would you be like, no, I don't want to go in once a month or once every couple weeks? I don't know what that frequency would look like. It would depend on the company, I'm sure, and the capacity of where they can sit and all of that. But I'm just curious what your
No,
thoughts
funny
are.
enough, funny enough, when I did accept this position, I had I had one other job offer that was really similar to the role, and it was also fully remote, but it was based out of Virginia, where this one's based out of Tampa. Only 45 minutes away from me. So that was a big factor on me accepting it, was the ability to come in. And technically, it is a fully remote position, but for me, it's kind of hybrid because I'm local. Now, the rest of my team, they're out of state, and some of them are even out of country. So they don't have that luxury. But for me, I do come in every now and then. I'd like to come in more. The unfortunate end for me is my director comes in about once a week. So I like to come in on the same day that he comes in. Because again, like if I'm going to go into the office and, work out of the office, the least I want to do is get some FaceTime with some people I'm going to be working with regularly. Because otherwise it's just like other departments that I don't know any of them. I don't know what they do really. So I'm in that weird environment where I don't have a dedicated space. So like if I wanted to just kind of come in and be able to, work right away without having to find a desk, I have to use my director's office, which contradicts me wanting to come in, right? Because I like to get FaceTime with him. So every now and then I'll come in. Mostly just to see him, and we'll get lunch together and stuff like that. But I'm kind of a broken record to him on my one-on-ones, because every time we're setting up like hoteling, similar to the way that you guys have experienced before, where you can kind of rent a desk. It just hasn't been established yet, but for sure, like for me anyway, like I want to come in once a week, right? Like if not more than that. It kind of like forces me to get used to that kind of environment, to where you're hyper focused, you don't really have any distractions or anything, and it kind of keeps you, for me, it keeps you in conditioning towards like an office environment, because you never know what could happen. 5 years from now, it might not be an opportunity, without, like if you want to get a promotion or something, you may have to return to the office. So for me, I like to kind of get that hybrid feel. But at the same time, I also think I approach it for the reason of this person's question, right? Like when you're remote, it is very difficult, at least for me, very difficult to have a lot of time with upper management and try to build those relationships. It's way harder than it would be in person, in my experience. So like that's kind of also one of my efforts to coming in. Yeah. So to answer your question, for sure, I like to come in. And I like to treat it as like that hybrid role for the same reasons that you do.
Curious too what your guys' thoughts are around. Because there's going to be people that really don't want to come in either. So going back to kind of personalizing, I see a couple of other opportunities that might help build that connection. One would be kind of group training. In the fact that if you could have people join on a remote tool or something like that, and be able to have kind of a State of the Union meeting or a training together, cameras on. I know that sounds crazy sometimes, but honestly, I think it helps a lot with just feeling that connection. We like to see people's faces and things like that. And then I think about like even outings or gatherings outside of work, right? Could you set something up where maybe they don't want to come into work, but would they meet up at a restaurant for, a dinner, or for some kind of let's get together, and maybe it's a charitable, activity that you all do, a cleanup or something like that, right? Something that can get people with different interests and different activity levels engaged and working together. And then probably the last thing that comes to mind for me, and I'd be curious what you guys think the impact would be on this, because it just came to my head as we're talking through this. But if I understood the question right, they're in an environment where there's a good chunk of people that have to come in 5 days a week, and you've got some folks that never come in. So I wonder if there's any animosity being created by that. Could there be some more flexibility with the people that have to come in? Right, we're talking about possibly forcing, or at least creating an opportunity for those who are fully remote to be able to come in. But is there also an opportunity to maybe let some of those 5 day a week in the office people maybe go to 4 day a week? Because then they also understand the challenges and the nuances of working remote, and they might have a little more of a desire to go out of their way to build that connection, or um, at least understand why the other ones maybe don't feel as connected because they get to walk a mile in those shoes, for lack of a better term. So I'm curious if you guys think that that would have any kind of impact, right? It's looking at it a different way rather than focusing on the remote employees, maybe focusing on the in-person employees and what you might be able to do there.
I think maybe it could be potentially helpful depending on the situation, but I don't think it would be universally good or like helpful, I guess, because I would imagine this is more of a situation where they're not in the identical, like same identical roles. I'm imagining they're like a part of like a larger team that has like split responsibilities, and maybe the people in office have to be in office for some physical reason, and then the people that are remote because they don't have to do anything in person. That's at least my mental model for understanding it. I could be wrong, but I still think like there could be a situation where like I would agree, but I would imagine that would be more on the if you're trying to fix people feeling a part of the team in the office, if like they feel like the remote workers get like a huge advantage over them or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But I do think something that I think is underrated, that I really loved at my last job, and that was like we had a "the so fun" chat, and on Teams, like we just had like a group chat, just that was literally just labeled "the so fun" chat, and we just like would message in that like pretty frequently throughout the day. It was just like fun memes or like interesting things that people loved. Like people would put in stuff about like favorite shows or movies that were coming out or what they were going to be doing this weekend. Like it was just kind of like an open space to like share fun stuff that they liked or that they knew someone else liked. And it just kind of it was just a little bit like lighter of a feeling. And I always personally really liked it. And I felt like I got a lot more insights into who people were based on that, because you get to know their actual interests and you can build a connection like that. And you may find out that like, oh, this coworker also enjoys like XYZ. Like maybe we can, do something online, right? If it's like a game or if it's like something that you can do remotely, I think is really nice. But even outside of that, I just think tech chats in general, especially on Teams, can be very, very helpful, even for work related items. Like I think one thing we did really well at our last job too was that we didn't use chats because they're not really the greatest tool for Teams. But it was what are they called? The little channel things. Yeah, just like a separate, like specific Teams channels that you could like make a post in and have people respond to with work related like questions. So like if you were struggling on something at work and you wanted some of your team's input, you could post it up there and you can have it back and forth. And it didn't need to be your direct managers responding to you, but it was another opportunity for you to work together with coworkers. And I feel like that's a big struggle when you're working remote, is that you don't actually get a lot of time to go back and forth with someone. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon. That's like if you don't feel like that's the case, but I would imagine like part of the issue is you get like a lot of solo things because it's harder to coordinate remotely, and then you never really get that collaborative experience with any of your fellow coworkers. So it's hard to feel like you're in it with them. Whereas if you're responding to their posts that they post about like work issues and you're helping them solve problems and then they're helping you solve problems, like I feel like it's just a little bit like of a bonding experience to some degree.
Yeah. Again, you have to kind of create that opportunity when you're fully remote or in a position to where you're not with others. Whereas when you're in person, I mean, think about this scenario, right? Like Colby, you're working on programming, you're stuck on something. You just can't help but to say it out loud. Like, what the hell? Like, what am I doing wrong? Suddenly, three people around you are able to either, whether they want to listen in or not, and kind of
Yep.
jump in, like, what's going on? Like anything I can take a look at, something like that. I mean, we've all been in that situation to where we can kind of just vent a little bit about something going on and problem solve together.
Yeah.
You can't really necessarily get that remotely, which actually really, really has me interested in Josh's virtual environment thing that he mentioned on Teams. I actually haven't heard of that yet. And like, as soon as I get off this, I'm going to kind of play around with it and see if I can get my team to jump on, because ironically, as much as it's, it's not really an open opportunity remotely. Whenever I do get my team on a call, like the collaboration is strong. Like I mean, we're all Power Platform developers, so we're very, very understanding of like the Microsoft platform. So we have a lot in common in that aspect of things. But we kind of, again, we have to present that opportunity, whether it's like a meeting or a quick call or something like that. So I'm definitely going to check out that virtual environment.
Yeah, it's under your view settings when you're in the meeting. Just click view, and then I think it says interactive experience or something like that. You'll know it.
What about the space option? You said there was like a space where you can kind of create a space.
That's what it is. So
Okay.
you go in there, and there's a couple of different places that you can play around with. Like I said, that was the main one we did, but there's like a big meeting room. I'm sure there's more to come.
Yeah, actually, I'm really familiar with Discord too, like you, Colby, and that's exactly how I operate. Right, like we have servers, and think of servers as like meeting rooms. And literally, if I'm like jumping on and I just want to like either like stream and share my screen and see who else is on, I just jump into the server and if one of my friends or see that I'm on, they'll pretty much walk in the room, right, and chat, hang out, we'll play together. They can leave, they can come and go. It's not like something that's always going on. So like you don't have to like set it up or anything.
Yep.
I think that would be really strong for getting management on board to like participate in something like that, because it would be essentially be like me tapping on your office door and kind of just what's up without calling you, right? Because no one likes to be called.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Like unfortunately, telemarketers ruined.
That's a you generation thing, guys. I don't mind someone picking up the phone calling me, but
it just feels so interruptive.
Yeah, it's just for me, it's like telemarketing has kind of ruined that experience. Like no matter what, even if it's your mom calling, like subliminally, there's something in the back of your mind saying like someone is literally calling me to cause like either like a sales pitch or a nagging issue or like some kind of stupid toll-free call. So it comes with like bad taste regardless.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Shan, if your team, like especially like maybe not make management, but even just like some of your coworkers, like would be open to like having your own Discord server where you guys could just pop in and just like hang out there while you're working. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like that could be like a really interesting idea, especially if like there are more people like you working remotely. Like I'd be curious to know, especially like within the programming space, like usually like people are more into and familiar with Discord. So I'd be curious to know if they would be interested at all in something like that, or if they would kind of, just kind of wave it off.
That's why I like what Josh mentioned. I'm definitely going to look into it, because if Teams kind of has that ability to create that Discord server, right, like within your team, it keeps it all centralized. Otherwise, yeah, that's a good idea too, Colby. Like I guarantee most of them use Discord.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good. I feel like that's a really solid idea that could, again, if you get upper management involved in something like that, it would be really easy to kind of create that opportunity informally to get more face time.
Yeah, because I feel like too, like upper management could still pop in and just like like you did, Josh, with us. Like sometimes you just come in, we wouldn't say a single lick about work. Like it would all be just like personal stuff. Like, hey, I know you're doing this weekend. Like, how'd that go? Or like we would just kind of like touch base like personally, and it's kind of weird to just call someone on Teams. Like if I just got a call, my boss just says, hey, what'd you do this weekend?
Formal. It becomes formal is the problem. And
exactly.
I think the approach with this person is like, how do we, with a large team or a remote team, like how do we create the informal environment? And I just don't think you can when you call someone.
Yeah.
Because you're basically establishing a meeting at that point.
Yeah. And in larger, like the thing is, like even like a large team, right? A Discord server is still nice because you can separate your voice channels into separate categories, right? So, in my Discord server, it's separated by the games that we're playing. So I join like the League of Legends voice channel if I'm playing League. I join the Diablo one if I'm playing Diablo, etc. Right? And so like you can have like separate spaces for each of your separate like team groups, right? So if you have you can even be like one for HR recruiting, or like another portion of HR has their own one, and any of them could freely go in between them, if it's not too much of an issue and doesn't cause too many problems. But like it would allow them just to like suddenly like hang out with people that they don't normally get to. And like me and Shan were saying, when you don't have to call, when you're just kind of popping in, it's literally, it feels like someone's just kind of like walking by your desk and saying hello, right?
Yeah, and seeing if you're in a call or not, right?
Yeah,
If you
because
are,
like you can
walk up.
show yourself as muted too. Like there's a little symbol. You do full mute so you don't hear sound. Your mic doesn't come across, and you can full mute it so if someone knows like you're not available or at least you may be away. I think there's still statuses you can even set on Discord too that show if you're away or not. So I feel like something like that would be super helpful if you got buy-in. Because that's the thing is like if I'm just sitting there and Shannon and Josh don't join ever, it's going to get to a point where I'm going to give up and I'm not going to ever join that Discord call. So yeah, it's definitely a problem with buy-in at that point.
Well,
I mean,
that's
you could approach it with like, I mean, Colby, let's say you and I are the employees, right? Like you and I started. We get a couple more on board. Maybe upper management's not really into it, but like we build something out of it.
Yeah.
And it becomes to the point where like, hey, you need some weigh in from it. Hey, can you join our quick, our virtual environment or whatever, and weigh in on this? And you might be able to sell the buy-in if that makes any sense.
Yeah, show the success of it. Now I'm gonna take it a little bit old school for a minute too, right? Because not everyone's as bought into tech as we are. So Discord and those types of tools, and even the virtual environment and Teams, right? I mean, it's neat. But I'm trying to think also, what if somebody wasn't as technically sound? There's a thing, and I just want to know because you guys are younger, and tell me if this would just be weird. But there's a thing I've seen where people like make up, say, like a plate of cookies or something, right? And they leave it on someone's desk. And what I'm thinking is, obviously, there's an element of stuff that comes with this, like postage, mail, which of course is old school, right? But I'm wondering if like you could start some kind of weird thing like that, or fun thing, not weird, but fun, right? Where you put something in the mail and your job is to kind of pass it on and surprise it to different people. Maybe it's not cookies, maybe it's something else like a letter of recognition, right? Or something, one of the tools we have here is something, it's called Good Vibes, and people can just kind of shout each other out. Now that is electronic, but again, it operates in a very similar fashion, right? It's just like a, hey, good job type of thing that
I love Good Vibes.
it even looks like a letter, right? So I'm just wondering if there's something like that, because I don't care. At least for me, I get excited when mail comes for me, even the junk mail. I'm like, ooh, I got a letter, right? It quickly goes in the trash when it's junk mail, but in general, there's still that initial, oh, cool, I got mail. Now, if that's coming from someone on my team, I might even get a little more excited, right? And be like, oh, what's this about? And if it was like a little, hey, tag, you're it in the appreciation chain, but just wanted to let you know that I think you're awesome. Right, and then it's your job to mail the letter. Colby definitely thinks it's cringy, but let me know what you're thinking, because I'm just curious. Like that would get people that maybe are more into the older, like.
So if you shot me, like, here's the thing, it would have to be like super personalized and super like genuine. If you start sending out, if it's regular and it's expected, it's not going to be special. So it needs to be something like, Josh, like if you just like say I was still working for you and you just like, you didn't say anything to me, like maybe we hadn't touched base in a little while, and you just wrote me like literally a handwritten letter and just said, hey Colby, I hope you're doing well, man, miss you, I hope everything's well, whatever, right? But it's personal and tailorized. Then like when I read that, I'm gonna be like, damn, like Josh really cared. He was, he was thinking about me, like meant a lot. Like that, I think that's cool. So I think stuff like that has a potential to be very meaningful to people because it definitely draws a connection. Um, but even to your point, like I know it's another tech option, but like Good Vibes was tremendous. I thought that was a huge success when we were still working together. I loved it. Like when someone got me a Good Vibe, like it was like a dopamine hit. Like it could have just said "you rock" and it was a dopamine hit because they had to type "you rock." They couldn't do a template. They actually had to like type their message. Like kind of how it worked for the audience who isn't aware. Essentially, we'd have these like kind of like work surveys that says like, hey, like how are you enjoying work, like how do you feel engaged, a bunch of different like survey questions. It was really quick and easy to do, but at the end sometimes it would say who on your team does this well or really stands like out to you? And then it would be like, send them a good vibe, right? And then it would kind of force you to think about it and realize, oh, like Shan always does this for me, and I've never taken the time to really just say, hey man, appreciate you and all that you do, so let me shout him out. And you could literally just type a message and they would get notified that they got a good vibe, and they can click on it. It opens up like a letter and it would say the message, right? And I thought that was a great tool, and I think that would be something that could be really helpful for remote workers, getting recognition in a more personal way from their bosses, from their coworkers. Like I think that would actually be really great.
That's a relatively cheap tool for anyone that's interested. We get no promotional credit for this, of course, but it's called Work Leap Office Vibe, and it has that pulse survey information like Colby was talking about, but the good vibes is included in there, and that is a almost a natural way to call out each other's wins and successes in a way that I think works for extroverts and introverts alike, right? Because introverts can get that private message. They don't have to have people watching it. But extroverts also get excited because, hey, they got a cool message, right? I mean, I think it works either way, whether you like to be called out publicly or privately. I think it's a beneficial tool. So there's definitely some ways to approach it. I think main things that I took away from today really is around creating inclusivity, but aligning that with personal preference and how people want to be included, because it's not a one size fits all approach. If and let's be honest, leadership is not a one size fits all approach. If it were, right, there'd be one book out there and it'd be super easy and everyone would just follow steps 1 through 3. And productivity, every team would be a world class, high performing team. But it takes a lot of nuance. It takes a lot of figuring out how to make the pieces of your puzzle fit. I got an analogy once from a former leader of mine, and he said, being a leader is very much like having a bag of assorted rubber bands. And what he meant by that and how he explained it was, it's not your job to get every single rubber band to do the exact same task and stretch to the exact same point, but it is your job as a leader to get every rubber band to stretch to its potential, right? And so even though that bag of assorted rubber bands might have different skills, reasons, and even functions based on what you're trying to use it for, the main point that he had is, by personalizing your approach, you can really help everyone achieve the potential that they have. So I think that was a really cool analogy that he shared with me years ago. And I think I'm going to wrap up my final thought with that. So
Like it.
Yep, like it a lot. I guess for me, it would also, I think I'm gonna have to parry you, Josh, about it's just you have to be personal about it and you have to be creative, because it really depends on your audience, right? You have to know who your audience is. Like if it's a bunch of people like me and Shan, try out the Discord thing. I actually genuinely think that could be really interesting and fun, especially if it's a bunch of people who are familiar with the platform already. Discord's free, doesn't cost anything to have a server. You just need to make a free account, invite people to it. It's a simple link. It's actually not very hard at all, and it doesn't require very much like administrative overhead. And just try it out with a couple people, or like maybe you could encourage the people that are interested in it to try it out if they're remote and hang out with people in that call. But to Josh's point, like not everyone's going to be super interested in that if they're not in a particular demographic, and you'll need to get creative. You can try out the good vibes, or sending someone an actual like personal note every now and then, or even just taking the time to be like, call and be like, hey, like just wanted to say like appreciate everything that you're doing, blah blah blah, right? Like just because like you've noticed like a bunch of stuff and it's going really well. But also to Shan's point, like I think people that are remote, if you really want to stay in touch with them, you need to do touch bases more frequently. Touch bases where you actually have a one-on-one with your manager are huge. It's one of my favorite things that like a boss could do with me, because it just kind of like, even if I see them on a daily basis, I still really appreciate it, because you don't have the time on a daily basis to really go into stuff at the level of detail that you want. And a touch base is a great opportunity for the employee to actually open up and really say what is on their mind, or like, vent about an issue, etc. And I always found it very, very helpful. So yeah, a bunch of different things to try out, and you just got to be creative.
Yeah, for me, it's I mean, I guess if you're coming from that leadership perspective and you're tackling this problem from a leadership what I would do, or at least what I would focus on, is like establishing that environment to where, in Colby's point, like someone has the opportunity to create more one-on-one time, or like an opportunity to collaborate without kind of forcing it upon everyone, right? Because there are some that just kind of like to stay in their lane, and if you're tackling it from an employee perspective, sometimes the environment's not always there. You have to get a little creative in producing that kind of situation and opportunity. So again, like in my example, it's not something that's easy for me in my position to kind of create that one-on-one time. So for me, doubling up on the times that we have one-on-ones and then creating those power groups, like things of that nature, kind of help me establish that balance, right? Because again, being fully remote, it's just, at the end of the day, it's just not as easy as it would be in person. So yeah, that's my kind of final thoughts.
No, for sure. And, one last thing that I'll throw out there, obviously, we're all remote. We don't do this in person and we still manage to feel connected. So taking time out to just even sometimes talk through ideas, talk through things, can be super helpful. Not to mention having a shared topic. So, if you're trying to have people connect with you, maybe share Mastermind with them for the masses with them, and then you guys can talk about the latest episode and build that connection. So that's what I would recommend as step one, is get everyone listening here. So share, subscribe, and leave us 5-star reviews, because we want to help you connect with others, and this is how we connect with each other. And just want to thank everyone for joining us today on Mastermind for the Masses, and we will see you all next week. Also, by the way, next week there's a sneak peek on a deep dive with Shan. So want to learn more about Shan, make sure you don't miss next week's episode. Have a great week, everyone.